Hi, my name is Chris and this is Battle Nonsense. In today's video I want to talk about a few different things. A question I hear a lot is, why does Battlefield 3's netcode feel better than Battlefield 4's when both use the same 10 and 30 Hz update rates? Which means that your client gets 10 updates per second from the server, while your client sends updates to the server 30 times. So that question is an interesting one. As we hopefully all still remember, Battlefield 3 set a new low for the netcode in the Battlefield franchise. When it came out we were all raging about how much worse it is than what we've got in Bad Company 2. Over the following weeks and months, DICE did changes to the netcode and got it into a state where the game is playable. Yet it is still bad, as when you fire controlled shots, other players sometimes don't see you fire. Player stance is often wrong, and as a result you end up getting shot by players who are not even looking at you. Or you see players vault over an object, but in reality he already finished vaulting over it and he shoots you. Or you get hit by a player even though you already ran around the corner of a building. And more things like that. A lot of this has been fixed by the introduction of the high frequency update option in Battlefield 4 in the June patch. But why do some players still feel that Battlefield 3 is snappier than Battlefield 4 with the high frequency update option? And why was Battlefield 4 even worse than Battlefield 3 at launch, even though it also uses the same rate? Before we dive into that, let's have a look at the measured delays. Battlefield 4 before the high frequency update option, or with it disabled, has an average delay of about 10 frames, which means 166 milliseconds. With the high frequency update option set to high, we now get 83.33 milliseconds for everything that is inside the 100-meter large bubble around the player. But what about Battlefield 3? Let's have a look. Same conditions as with my Battlefield 4 tests. Client used separate internet connections, 15 milliseconds ping. I fired 300 shots and took the average delay. And surprise, the average delay is 8 frames. That are 133.28 milliseconds. So about 33 milliseconds less than the average delay of Battlefield 4 without the high frequency update option. But how can that be when both use the same rates? And why was Battlefield 4 so obviously worse on release than what Battlefield 3 was like at that time after all the patches? The reason why it was so much worse is, in my opinion, to be found in the changes DICE did for Battlefield 4. They knew that their netcode could barely handle what they asked it to do in Battlefield 3. But instead of reworking that more than critical part of their game for Battlefield 4, they just loaded even more on top of it. Battlefield 4 got networked water simulation, Levolution, and the battle screen, which lets you see the minimap on your secondary screen or mobile device. I think that these added even more stress to the netcode. We also got the spectator feature and the commander, including tablet commanders. The features DICE added for Battlefield 4 are surely great for us. We did really wait very long for the spectator and the commander to return. And networked water simulation, Levolution and the battle screen are nice too. But how on earth could they put all that on top of Battlefield 3's netcode? You could hear it crack under the load of this game already. Battlefield 4 is like taking a 4-storied building where the foundation could barely sustain that load, and then add 2 more floors on top of it. Of course that will make it collapse, as the structure, the foundation, just can't handle it. So without the high frequency update option, the delay in Battlefield 4 is about 33 milliseconds longer than in Battlefield 3. But with the high frequency update option, the delay of Battlefield 4 is down to 83 milliseconds. So on the paper, Battlefield 4's netcode should be far superior to the one in Battlefield 3, because Battlefield 4 now sends and receives updates 30 times per second, at least when you set the high frequency update option to high and only inside the 100-meter bubble around the infantry player. So this helps with the wrong player stances, with the invisible fired shots, and with getting shot around the cover, as well as your shots not registering. But why do players still say that Battlefield 3 feels snappier, even though the delay in Battlefield 4 is now much less? Maybe these players were not using the high frequency update option yet. This is an issue I spoke about when the feature was introduced, as the first version that is currently used in Battlefield 4 has it disabled by default. You have to enable it manually and choose between high, medium and low, which I explained in one of my previous videos. The next step is that this feature is enabled by default and chooses the best rate for you based on your internet connection automatically. I will talk about this a bit later, but for now, if you are on PC, PlayStation 4 or Xbox One, just head over to the gameplay options in-game and set the high frequency update option to high. Another change is that the soldier movement has become slower in Battlefield 4, so you feel heavier. Generally speaking, this is a good change. I like the soldiers to feel like they have some weight. But the way it is done in Battlefield 4 could still be improved. It feels more like a fat suit. I'd also like to see a future Battlefield game to take the loadout of the classes into account. Which means that a light-packed recon or a medic plays a bit differently than a support or an engineer. This would help to balance classes even better and give each class more character, so you know by the feel of it which class you are playing. And then there's the weapon design. This means how the weapons and their fired projectiles work. This also includes features like the visual recoil, which is tweaked in the CTE at the moment. This has all been changed in Battlefield 4, and that's why you feel a difference when using the same gun you have available in Battlefield 3. Because it is no longer the same gun. This definitely has a big impact in what the game feels like. But what else could it be? How about the input delay? Now what's that again? It is the time between you pressing the fire button and your soldier starting to fire. This delay is the input delay. Yes, I do ignore the display delay, but let's keep this simple here in the interest of understanding the basics first. Now, I can't measure the input delay as doing this right requires hardware I don't have. But that has been done for Battlefield 4 in the process of testing Nvidia's G-Sync technology by the blurbusters.com. So compared to Crysis, which has an average delay of 55 milliseconds, and Counter-Strike Go, which has an average delay of 25 milliseconds, the average delay of Battlefield 4 is 75 milliseconds, which is massive compared to these other games. Now, as I said, I can't test the input delay of Battlefield 3, but I can tell you what helps on my system to make Battlefield 4 feel a bit snappier. First of all, disable VSync. Yes, this causes tearing, yes, this is ugly, but since we are not working on a cinematic, it does not really disrupt your gameplay. When you enable VSync, you get rid of tearing at the cost of an additional delay. I don't want that additional delay. Another thing is that you should not lock or cap your frame rate at 60 frames per second, even if you are only playing on a 60 Hz monitor. On my system, I can clearly notice a difference between the game being kept at 60 frames per second and being limited to 120 frames per second. It does feel more responsive when I have it at 120 frames per second. I started to notice this when I was still using Fraps for recording, which limited the displayed frame rate to 60. Now, if it is the same on your system, you need to test for yourself. You can easily change the frames per second limit by using the gametime.maxVariable FPS in the console. Or you put that command into a user.cfg file, which you place in the install directory of Battlefield 4. And if you use recording software, then you need to check if it limits your displayed frames per second or not. You can do that by simply letting Battlefield 4 display the current FPS on screen by using the perf overlay.drawFPS and then a 1 command to enable it. You can also add that to the same user.cfg, so you don't need to enter this every single time you start the game. So that's what I think about why Battlefield 3 feels differently, maybe a bit more responsive than Battlefield 4 with the high frequency update option set to high. One thing is very clear to me, and that is that DICE has to stop prioritize the trailer material features over the core functionalities of the game. The hit registration, player stance, hit indicator, everything that is associated with the term netcode just has to work. There is no excuses if that does not work in a first-person shooter. Just like the engine in your car has to work or it just can't function. DICE also needs to think about if what they are planning to add to a game actually makes the gameplay better. And not just add things that look good in a trailer, but make no sense at all or even harm the gameplay. This is what I'm afraid of for Battlefront, that we will see the same broken netcode there, which is still limited to 30 Hz, and that it will be full of features that make great trailers, but don't do anything good for the gameplay. Another thing I want to talk about briefly is the HighPingPlayers issue. If you have not already seen my video about this topic, then please have a look. This does not only affect Battlefield 4, it also affects Battlefield Hardline. And not just on the PC, but also on the consoles, where players don't even see the real player pings, nor do they have any way to kick HighPing players from the servers they rent. So if you agree with what I said in that video, that we need to get EA to have more game server providers around the world, so that people have low ping servers available for them, and that we need an inbuilt HighPingKicker feature the admins can choose to enable, and players can specifically search for servers which have it enabled, or exclude such servers from their search results in case a player knows that he has a bad ping, then please show DICE that you want to see that happening by supporting this on Reddit and the Battlelog forums. The links are in the description. Another thing I hear frequently from my viewers is that on console they finally want to see the actual ping value. On PC, Battlefield shows you the real ping value for any server and all the players that are on that server. For some reason DICE decided to go with a signal strength like icon on the consoles instead. Maybe they thought that it is too complicated to understand the meaning of a number for the connection. However, as I frequently hear from many console players, this is not what they want. They want to see their ping to a server in milliseconds and not in form of some icon, where you have no clue what kind of ping range qualifies for the all bars full icon. To keep it intuitive, DICE could still use colors to clearly indicate if a ping value is perfect, good, mediocre or just bad. The scoreboard on consoles does not even have that signal strength icon to show what kind of latency each player has. So if you get killed by another player in a very strange way, you don't know if he's maybe having a very high ping and that causes this. As a console player, you also don't know if there are many players with a very high ping above, in example, 200 milliseconds on the server, in which case you might decide to just look for a different server. Console players should also be allowed to see the real ping value. They want to see their real ping value to a server just as much as they want to know the latency of the other players that are on the same server. Since Battlefield shares the same codebase for all platforms, this should be a fairly easy and quick change for DICE to implement. Not just for Battlefield 4, but for Battlefield Hardline this would be welcome as well. If you are a console player and you want to see the real ping values, then please have a look at the description where I have the links to Reddit and Battlelog where you can support this. Things like this only get a chance to become implemented if the players focus on putting all their support in one place, rather than starting 100 individual requests. And now some CTE stuff. As I said a bit earlier, the developers of Dice LA announced that the way the high frequency update works in Battlefield 4, where you have to manually enable it and choose between high, medium and low, was just the first step of this feature. As we have seen in the Hardline beta, there is now the auto value, which is the default and adjusts the used rate in a range between 30 and 10 Hz based on your internet connection. Besides auto, you no longer have high, medium and low to select. What you have is on, which forces the 30 Hz update rate, and off, which disables the high frequency update, and the game runs with 10 Hz for the server to client update rate. What is still missing in the Hardline beta is a way to find out what rate is actually used when you select the auto setting. In the CTE we now got a network performance graph, which does not only tell you the rate, but also the latency as well as the packet loss. To enable it in the Battlefield 4 CTE, you just have to open the console and type network perf overlay.draw graph and then add a 1 to enable it. And boom, tons of info on the screen, no one has a clue what they mean. I'm just kidding. I still hope that the update rate will also be added in the performance test, since this will be what most users will go to in case that they have some issues in game. And since we are talking about the CTE, if you thought that Dice LA is done with it after the netcode changes, then think again. We are now testing changes for Rush. They removed the commander by default in that game mode, which is really great because it didn't really make much sense there. Radar sweep range around the attacker bases was reduced, and it seems that at the start of the round we are getting a timer, so that players with fast PCs can start arming MCOMs before people with weaker PCs playing the defenders have even finished loading the map. Dice is also changing the maps to make them work better for Rush. They started with Siege of Shanghai and Savot. In Shanghai, they removed all air vehicles from the map to make this a land strike only map. Even though I love my helicopters, this was the right call for that map. They also cut the power to all the elevators in the map, which is great, no more roof campers. They tweaked the position of the MCOMs of all bases, they tweaked the vehicle setup, they slightly tweaked the combat areas and spawns, but I haven't played enough to notice the difference yet. They added a few cover pieces to go with the updated MCOM positioning. And on Savot they changed the map so it becomes easier for the attackers, especially on the base 1 and base 4. They major rebalanced the vehicles in favor for the attackers. In example, the attackers get a transport helicopter from base 2 and onwards. This is especially helpful for that last base, which you almost never had a chance to take unless the defenders were total idiots. So as I've seen from playing it in the CTE, this change is really great for that map in Rush. So from what I've seen so far, these changes make Rush much more enjoyable on these two maps. And I can't wait to see what other changes will come out of the community test environment. And that's it for today. Quite a long video again. Hope you didn't fall asleep. If you want to reach me, you can do so on Twitter and by email. The links are in the description. Please consider to hit the subscribe button if you like my content, and I will hopefully see you next time. Until then, have a nice day and take care. My name is Chris and this was Battle Nonsense.